On the Track is a web TV show about cryptozoology, natural history, green issues and whatever else the team feel like making up as they go along. Enjoy!
So what do we have in this episode, Mr. Jon?
Well, Hennis, this time we go to the Netherlands with Dr. Max Blake, who has done some remarkable filming inside Burgers Zoo, which has sparked Richard and me to be talking about all sorts of zoo-related things. So it's a joint effort, really. Max's wonderful visuals plus Richard's and my blurb, followed by a mixture of all sorts of odds and sods, mostly sent to me by Miss Maxine. So we've got a very special show for you today. Oh yeah, and there's an albino manta ray as well. Enjoy.
I really like the old credits.
So, Rossiter, what's the scuttlebutt then with the old youth outreach centre down in Brixton?
Oh Barry, we has been having a great time.
Oh, what have you been doing then?
Oh, we have scented them on holiday. They have gone on their holidays and we have scented them somewhere special.
And where have you sent them, Rossiter?
I have sent them camping in Copenhagen.
Rather them than me.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name's John Downs. I'm the director of the Centre for Fortean Zoology, and welcome to another episode of On the Track. As many of you probably know by now, every Wednesday evening at 6:30 for about quarter of an hour, and every Saturday afternoon at 3 for about half an hour, we bring you a miscellany, a potpourri, if you will, of hard science, weird shit, and surreality. What's surreality, you ask? Well, have a gander at this. You might learn something.
Waltzing Matilda, you'll come a waltzing Matilda with me.
People who've read my most recent book, which is called The Wild Colonial Boy, and it's about my story of my life in Hong Kong as a child, will remember that when I'm talking about our voyage from Hong Kong via Borneo down to Australia, how as we were crossing the outskirts of the Great Barrier Reef, I saw a manta ray jumping out of the water, and how even now, 55 years later, 54 years later, that is still one of the most amazing wildlife encounters of my life.
The manta ray is the largest of the ray family. Of course, it is an elasmobranch, relative to the sharks. That is a fish with no bones. Its entire skeletal frame is made of cartilage, rather like your nose. So it's got no solid parts. It's dorso-ventrally flattened and bat-like in shape. In fact, I always think it looks like the bat plane. It's the biggest of the rays, and it can grow to 23 feet or 7 metres across the wings, which it uses to fly underwater. Its rather bizarre look led to it being called the devilfish at one time, but of course it's completely harmless unless it happens to leap out of the water and land on you when you're swimming, because they can weigh about a ton. But like the whale shark and the basking shark, like all the biggest elasmobranchs, in fact, it's a filter feeder and it feeds on plankton, so it's totally harmless to human beings. It's found throughout the tropics and the subtropics, and it is a truly magnificent animal to observe, and it does seem to display a degree of intelligence when ones have been freed from getting entangled in nets by divers. They swim around seeming to be grateful for being free, but whether or not this is anthropomorphism on the part of us is another question.
Last week, the ever lovely Miss Maxine sent me this video that you found on Facebook somewhere. We are using this video through the policy of fair use. Just check this out for a second before we go any further. Until 2008 it was thought that there was only one species of manta ray, but in 2008 Dr. Andrea Marshall did a remarkable piece of fieldwork and she discovered a second species. The new species that Dr. Marshall discovered is much larger than the previous known species of manta ray. It has huge triangular pectoral fins and a distinct patination, as well as being in many cases lighter coloured than the original manta ray species. But it turns out there are at least 2, maybe 3 cryptozoological manta rays as well. There is a lot of evidence that there is a new species of manta ray in the Caribbean, and also a new species lurking in the waters off Chile, up as far as Baja California. But probably the most well-known, certainly the longest-standing cryptozoological manta ray is the one described by William Beebe.
William Beebe was an American naturalist who's best remembered for making the first deep-sea dives in a bathysphere off Nonsuch Island from 1930 to 1934, where he descended to a depth of about half a mile and was the first person to observe deep-sea life in its natural habitat. In 1923, on an expedition to the Galapagos, he recorded a new type of manta ray that had white stripes on it. And this manta ray has never been fully confirmed by science and is hence considered to be a cryptid, or Beebe's manta ray.
And the more I looked into it, the more mysterious manta rays I found. I even found stories of a pink manta ray. I mean, cop a load of this. And it all comes from something that dear Miss Maxine sent me last week when I was ill because she thought it would cheer me up. Thank you, my dear, and thank you for setting us off on yet another interesting rabbit hole. But now I've got something totally different for you. The other day, my old friend and adopted nephew, really, Dr. Max Blake. Dr. Max! Dr. Max! Dr. Max! Hey! Sent me this video. The Royal Burgers Zoo is a 45 hectare, which is 110 acres for those of us who still speak civilized language, zoo in Arnhem in the Netherlands, and is one of the biggest zoos in the country. Arnhem is a city that lies within the Veluwe, a nature park in the east of the country. The zoo is very popular with both Dutch and German people and receives about 1.5 million visitors each year. It was founded by Johan Burgers in 1913. It's a member of the Dutch Zoo Federation, the European Association of Zoos and Aquaria, IAZA, the International Species Information System, ISIS. I think they're probably going to have to change that name, because I think it's not going to give the social image that they want it to, and the World Association of Zoos and Aquariums, WAZA.
John, where is this zoo again?
It's the Royal Burgers Zoo in Arnhem in the Netherlands.
Ah, okay, yeah. I'd love to visit, but I'm worried it's just one bridge too far away.
By the way, for those of you who didn't recognise his voice, that was Louis, our producer, sticking his oar in the way that producers since time immemorial have always stuck their oars in. I'm very impressed with this exhibit because it is a giant artificial rainforest and it covers an area of 3.7 acres, that's 1.5 hectares, 3.7 acres, and it's an indoor tropical rainforest. It's called Burgers Bush, which is a mildly entertaining name. Come on, Louis, say something entertaining to it.
It's not entertaining. Young people don't need entertainment. But Miley Cyrus.
Well, I've always been interested in exploring bushes.
I've always been impressed with artificial rainforests. I've been meaning to go to the what's the place in Cornwall with the trees?
The Eden Project.
The Eden Project. I've been there twice, but once was to see the Pet Shop Boys, the other was to see Peter Gabriel. And both times I went, I only had a cursory look at the gardens. But I've always wanted to go to their artificial rainforest because they're supposed to be pretty spectacular. Have you ever been?
No, I never have. But I know that Chester Zoo has something similar, but I haven't been to Chester in 20 odd years. But they've got an exhibit that's based on the Indonesian islands, and they've got things like Sumatran tigers and false gharials and all sorts of things in there. But I've never been, but apparently it's very, very good. Chester is a renowned collection, but I haven't been in years.
I haven't been in even longer. The only time I ever went to Chester Zoo was in the summer of 1967, and I went with my grandmother, who lived in Chester, and it was the first time I ever saw an okapi, and it was the first time I ever saw a pygmy hippo. These days everywhere's got pygmy hippos and no one's got common hippos. But back in the 60s it was the other way round.
No one has common hippos because they swear and spit and read the sun.
I went to something similar on a much smaller scale when we visited Thrigby Hall in, is it in Norfolk or in Suffolk, Rich?
Thrigby Hall? Good question. I think it's Norfolk.
Yeah, I think
I've never been. I've always wanted to go. They've got saltwater crocodiles, mugger crocodiles. It's all Asian. Mostly Asian, isn't it? Asian themed zoo.
I was really impressed because I'd never seen, well, not since I was a boy in a animal park in Australia when I saw saltwater crocodiles. I'd never seen them in captivity. And so I was really looking forward. That was the main reason I went there, because I wanted to see the saltwater crocodiles. But they were quite, I mean, they were long. They were sort of 9-10 foot long, which I know is about a third of the maximum size. But they were dinky little things compared to the muggers. The muggers were they were like bloody JCBs or Centurion tanks or something. They were just the biggest, nastiest, meanest son of a bitches you've ever seen.
Well, they were probably adult muggers and sub-adult saltwater crocs. Muggers will take down tigers and water buffaloes, but the saltwater croc can be twice as big as a mugger and much, much more aggressive.
It's
What's
just
a mugger?
a mugger. It's a type of crocodile.
I didn't know that either.
It
But
comes from the Hindu mugger, meaning water monster.
Ooh.
But they're so much chunkier than the Indo-Pacifics. They look like bodybuilders. They're really, they look like they've got so much sort of surplus muscle that they only have it in order to show off. Fantastic looking creatures.
But when they reach adulthood, a saltwater crocodile can be as broad as a car.
Bloody hell. There's an interesting species list of the animals that they've got there, which are mostly birds and a few reptiles. But at the risk of sounding speciesist, it's not a particularly stellar collection of wildlife. But the thing that makes it so fantastic is the way that the animals and the plants are all integrated together. And just looking at this footage which Max filmed reminds me of the hillsides in Hong Kong that I used to walk along and play in when I was a boy. And you hear these sounds of laughing thrushes and bulbuls in the background, and you hardly ever see the birds themselves.
The paradox of the rainforest is that it contains more species than anywhere else on Earth, but they're harder to see because of the vegetation. For example, every time I've been in the Sumatran jungle, I've heard Siamang gibbons, but I've never once seen them. And there are elephants, tigers, tapirs, all sorts of things, and you'll find tracks, but you'll very rarely see the creatures themselves.
Yeah, I remember when I was in the El Yankee rainforest in Puerto Rico with Graham. It was Graham's first time in a rainforest, and he said, "Well, where are all the animals?" I said, "Just listen, you can hear them." And there were dozens of different sorts of bird, and most excitingly for me, there were at least 8 different species of coqui, the little Puerto Rican tree frogs, all singing. And you can tell these species apart because their calls slightly different. But you didn't see anything. I think in the whole rainforest, Graham and I saw a couple of butterflies and a small lizard, and that was it.
Well, you didn't even see any spiny chupacabras.
I'm afraid not. No spiny chupacabras.
We've seen various types of monkeys, mainly daughter monkeys, but nothing big. Nothing like an elephant or a tapir or anything like that.
Something that's always surprised me is whenever we've put out trail cameras in the tropics, and you've done it in India, you've done it in Sumatra, You get nothing. I think from one Sumatra, when you had eight trail cameras out, and you got one very blurry picture of a small bird. Whereas when we put out trail cams in temperate countries, such as Britain or Tasmania, we get absolute cartloads of animals.
Well, when I put them out in England, we left them up for a month rather than a few days. So we got otters, badgers, woodpeckers, deers, foxes, and a woman having a pee in the bushes. But in the tropics, we've mostly just put them out for a short amount of time. But on this last trip, we did get something on the trail cam, something very special, which we talked about last episode. A full-grown female Sumatran tiger. Now that is something very special to get on a trail cam. Wish we'd have got orangutan though.
But do you remember when you were in Tajikistan, you put up a trail camera and it was only up for 2 days?
And we got bears and we got wild boars and foxes. I'm surprised we didn't get wolves, but we got bears and boars and foxes.
Didn't you get a crested porcupine?
No, that was a different thing. When Dave Archer and I were doing a night walk once, I briefly saw what I thought to be a crouching figure with long grey hair, and I saw it for maybe half a second, and I said to Dave, I've just seen something there that appeared to be something crouching down with long grey hair, and it's coming through the trees towards the road, and we thought it might be a ghoul, but then it stepped out onto the path, and it was a crested porcupine. The long grey hair was actually the quills in the moonlight that I'd seen for maybe half a second.
I think the thing that I like most about this glorious artificial rainforest is that it is not designed for the benefit of people and visitors. It's not designed for the benefit of the zoo staff. It's designed purely for the animals. And it means that when people go to visit, rather than having a cage in front of them with 2 or 3 birds of one species in it, people are just going to have to work harder to be able to see the animals. And it is much more of an immersive experience. And I think it's a great pity that so many zoos that I've visited across the world, but in particularly in Britain, so many of the zoos I've visited are laid out for the benefit of the idiot people who go there to visit, rather than for the benefit of the creatures who actually live there. However, as I think anybody listening to this show will know, both Richard and I are much more sympathetic towards animals than we are towards people. I think that both zoos and museums should be temples. They are temples at which you go to worship at the altar of Mother Nature. They're not supposed to be indoor play areas for people to take their revolting offspring to run around screaming.
Another really good zoo, another one of my favourites, is Paynton Zoo, which I used to go to when I was a kid. And one of the things I remember, they had these enormous white rhinos, like tanks, and there was a big warning sign up saying that they spray their urine backwards like a hose. And we were there one time, and one of them piddled and hit this guy on the arm, which I'll always remember, which I found immensely funny. But in recent years, they had a new crocodile house, which was amazing, and they got Nile crocodiles, saltwater crocodiles, and Cuban crocodiles, and it was an enormous, great place that you walk round. Huge, the biggest, one of the biggest reptile houses I've ever seen. It was absolutely fantastic. So Paynton is another one of my favourite zoos. But there used to be, if you're looking at old books on British zoos, and one of the things that interests me most is the history of zoos. There's a great book called Animals on View, and there's a hardback version and a softback version, and they were done in the late 90s, and they listed all the different zoos, the big zoos, the country estates, the town zoos and the small collections, and there used to be lots and lots and lots of small zoos, most of which don't exist anymore, and a lot of them mixed animals with fairground rides, and I've always hated that. I've always hated that because it sort of puts animals on the same level as cheap sort of Blackpool style amusements, and I've never ever liked it. I've always thought it was crass and annoying and disgusting. And in Britain there are a handful of zoos that still do this, a handful of sort of these leftovers from a less enlightened time where animal exhibits are next to stupid rides and pirate ships and things like that that really annoy me, and actually they're a disgrace to the profession of zookeeping, and places like that give ammunition to the anti-zoo lobby. Another great zoo is Singapore Zoo, which I've visited on a couple of times when I've been coming back from Sumatra. They've got great sun bear exhibit, more sun bears than anywhere else I've ever seen. I think they rescue sun bears. They've got white tigers, a great Asian elephant exhibit, giraffes, rhinos. They've got saltwater crocodiles with an underground viewing place where you can go to the glass and they'll come right up to the glass because it's like underwater. And they've got African hunting dogs. And they have things like what ordinary zoos have, like lions and zebras and giraffes and kangaroos, and then they have unusual things. Like they had arapiamas, the great South American huge freshwater fish, and they had them in an exhibit with spider monkeys, and I was always thinking they could jump about the water and grab the spider monkeys and drag them down and eat them. But around the zoo you also get the local wildlife from Singapore, so you get like Asian water monitors wandering around the zoo, and they've got Komodo dragons at Singapore Zoo, and people sometimes think that baby Komodo dragons have got out and they're roaming around the zoo, but they're not. They're the Asian water monitors that just occur there naturally, and they do a night safari as well, so you can go and see the animals in the daytime, and they'll take you around at night to see things that come out at night, like aardvarks and striped hyenas and crested porcupines and all sorts of things. And it's a really great zoo. It's probably my favourite international zoo. Paignton is my favourite British zoo, and Singapore is my favourite international zoo. If you want to support us and help us make more content like these, please press like, subscribe, follow our Facebook page, and check out our Patreon.
And as the ghost of Joe Strummer, who is an ever more regular visitor to my little studio, wants me to remind you, always press the notification bell. Otherwise you won't be told when there's a new show to watch.
And that would be an awful pity, wouldn't it?
And here we are at the end of another episode. I hope you enjoyed it. I'd like to say a big thank you to everybody but for whom the show wouldn't have been made. This episode particularly featuring Richard Freeman, my producer Louis, Maxine, Miss Maxine, and Dr. Max. Maxine and Max, or Max and Maxine, sound like a particularly corny Eurovision act, don't they? But Dr. Max and Miss Maxine for the video of Burgers Zoo and the video of the white albino manta ray. I'd also like to thank my old friend Graham Inglis, who, as well as being the Deputy Director of the Centre for Fortean Zoology, a post he's held for about a quarter of a century now, is also my carer. And as my body seems to be packing up faster than usual, Graham, I'm afraid, has had quite a lot to do to look after me. And I'd like to thank our two new housekeepers, Miss Judy and Miss Shelley, who are doing a magnificent job and who are making my house nicer than it's been in a long time. I am back on Wednesday. What have I got on Wednesday? Well, I think that we have some video that Richard Freeman took at the recent ASAP conference. And I'll be back next Saturday. What's in that? Well, as it says in the Bible, sufficient unto the day be the evil thereof. So I have no idea what's going to be in next Saturday's show, but I do know that if you're going to be hanging around waiting for it, and I'm talking about you, McCrinnan, then I'll be seeing you.